So The Hunger Game, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes is super underrated, and I honestly love this movie. I think it's so fascinating from a character study perspective. And at a time where we've seen so many dystopian action movies, I feel like this one definitely is able to stand apart. Firstly, because of the fact that it's linked to The Hunger Games and is set 64 years before the first movie and novel. But also because it focuses so brilliantly on Coriolanus Snow's rise into villainy. And honestly, like I said, from a character study point of view, the way in which they pretty much destroyed this character was just done so well. And so it feels similar to what they've done with Anakin Skywalker and Scar very recently in the Mufasa movie, in terms of creating a character that you're really rooting for, and then you're pretty much heartbroken when you see them descending into evil and villainy. And so from a psychology point of view, it's really captivating, and even though Heath Ledger's Joker said this years ago, I think it's still so relevant today, in terms of anybody can become mad, all they need is a little bit of a push. And Lucy Gray in this movie also says something similar, in terms of everybody is born good, but you just have to work really, really hard to not overstep the mark and enter into darkness. And even though this movie is pretty different to the other four, in terms of it doesn't have a big spectacle for the Hunger Games, which I think is understandable, as of course this is the 10th Games instead of being the 75th Games. But it's also pretty Shakespearean in terms of the tragedy of this lead character, as he is so nice and so supportive towards Lucy Gray right in the beginning. But I feel like it's really interesting, as some people have said he has always had that in his blood, as you can attribute every single decision that he does make back into personal gain. So let's break down that ending. So it seems like they're going to have this somewhat happily ever after, as Snow and Grey are both escaping to the north, but then Snow slips because he's thinking he can pretty much say anything to Lucy Gray, and he reveals that he's killed 3 people, which Lucy immediately jumps on, as she's like, what? Who's the third person? And even though he covers it up by saying, look, it was pretty much my old self, you can also say that there is some poeticness to this, as he pretty much did kill off that good side to him. And Lucy has always said that she just wants trust, and now she feels like her trust towards Snow is completely broken. And she's clearly putting all of the pieces together that the third person really is his best friend, and if he can do this to his best friend, then she is viewing her own life and herself as being expendable, especially as he has now found the guns, which is the final bit of incriminating evidence to allow him to go back to his original life. And this really is the beginning of the end of their relationship. It's a shame that this sequence is just so rushed, as I feel like they really should have just explored this moment a little bit more, as this is when he's pretty much turning into his darker self, especially when he realizes that she has escaped and pretty much left him, so he is now hunting for her with the gun, clearly with the unfortunate intention of wanting to kill her. But Lucy Gray has been demonstrated to be a really clever character, so she leaves the scarf which he gave her from a family heirloom perspective, which is another dagger to the heart, but this leads to the snake biting him, which I feel like leads to certain hallucinations taking place. For example, you could say that the footsteps that he sees are hallucinations, as well as the fact that when he thinks he's shot her, that could also be a hallucination, as she is wearing a different dress to what we see them walking with. I personally feel like Lucy Gray did escape and she was able to live her happily ever after in the north, and then contrastingly, Snow is just giving into the darkness and then just does become the evil person that we see him become in the future movies. One of the reasons for this is that he is in a perpetual state of fear, thinking that Lucy Gray could come back at any moment and reveal the truth, which would potentially undo everything. I personally think if Lucy Gray ever did do this, it would pretty much be his word against hers, as he has removed all of the incriminating evidence. But the other reason that he's pretty much broken is that if he does think that he has killed Lucy Gray, then he is the person responsible for destroying his true happiness, so he has to live with the guilt of the fact that he has potentially killed Lucy Gray. I mean, you could counter argue this by saying, look, his true motivation was only ever trying to make his family rich and successful, and that he is driven by this more so than his love for Lucy Gray, which is why I think he's just such a fascinating and complex character. What I think is truly evil and truly twisted is that he is the person responsible for Sejanus, his best friend's death, yet his best friend's parents then made him their new heir, and so he was then able to get all of the money and then just live this happily ever after. Very Ripley, and also very similar to Saltburn. I think it's also really interesting social commentary from High Bottom's perspective, as he was always provoking Snow, and then right at the end, he was trying to make Snow feel sorry for him by saying, look, I never really intended for the Hunger Games to become a thing, because it was just a drunken idea that your father then made a reality, but then Snow kills him by poisoning one of the veils that we always see this character drinking, and then you get to really see his ascendancy into becoming the president of the Hunger Games. So I honestly feel like this prequel just works so well. I feel like it interconnects into everything that we know from the Hunger Games movies franchise perspective really, really well, in a very similar way to how Mufasa and Star Wars have interlinked all of their prequel and sequel storytelling. For example, you can now see why Snow has always hated District 12, and the song that we see in the future films being the thing that haunts Snow, the reason now is because actually they were folklore music started by Lucy. I wonder if Lucy is Katniss's grandmother, and maybe she is the person that taught her this. I think there's also interesting social commentary in terms of some people will always stab you to get what they want. I think there's also some dark social commentary in terms of some people in society will come across in a very charismatic and very charming and very supportive way, but in reality, they will not hesitate to stab you in the back in order to progress further. I think it's an interesting debate in terms of, was this character always, from a nature perspective, destined to become evil, or was it all nurture? Was he groomed into becoming this evil guy, and were the last aspects of a nice guy completely destroyed? I feel like the way in which this movie and novel are created is that they want you to think the former, as he has always got some darkness in him, especially the ideas that he is given with Dr. Gall across this movie. I mean, the book definitely makes this character seem a lot more calculated and a lot more manipulative than being innocent and confused, which I feel like the movie definitely leans a little bit more into. And the lens in which this movie looks at how the 1% look at the 99%, I think is also really interesting in terms of they just view them as servants pretty much for them, for their amusement, and they really don't even view them as humans. They view them as savages, and they want to always control them to ensure that they prevent them revolting, to completely destroy any hope and ambition that they potentially have. I feel like A Brave New World looked at this so well in terms of the rise and power at the people at the bottom of society, and how they were able to overthrow the people at the top, especially after all of the abuse that the people at the top were giving to them. I think another aspect of this movie that's really fascinating is that it explores that everybody has got a bit of an animalistic quality inside of them, and it's only when you really push people to breaking point that this will really be revealed. And for Snow, you got to see this when he was brutally killing someone. Of course, he did this out of desperation when he was in the arena and when he was thinking that nobody is watching him. But what was really profound is that when he revealed that he felt really powerful taking someone's life. And I feel like Tom Blyth played this character to perfection. You can really see how Donald Sutherland's version of this character became so twisted. And they always do say that villains make so much more of an interesting character study than heroes, and the way in which this movie was pretty much depicting this film from this character's perspective, I honestly think it just came together in such a fascinating way. Rachel Zegler was also really, really good as Lucy Gray. Very enigmatic and very confident and very smart. Not a warrior like Katniss, and I think this was important to make her really different. And I just love the way in which the relationship between Lucy Gray and Snow just evolves from a mental relationship to a romantic relationship to then becoming mortal enemies with one another. And as individuals, they were just so driven by their own personal objectives that they were never really able to have a future together. I mean, you could argue that Lucy Gray's objective was just pure survival due to the unfortunate circumstances of all of the things that the 1% have put her through. But nonetheless, I think as far as romantic partnerships and relationships go, the way in which they were just depicted in this movie was just done 10 times better than other places I've done. Viola Davis was so good as Dr. Gall, truly does put a chill down your spine, and very Willy Wonka, very larger than life, and such a psychotic games creator, and just really enjoys pushing people to the limit. And she really does see something in Snow, especially with his ideas of how you grab people's attention and really make them captivated and willing to invest in this TV show. And when she saw that in him, she was just squeezing him dry. And you could also look at this as abuse and grooming, as she was pretty much always dangling a carrot in front of him. She knew exactly all of the buttons to push in order to get a reaction from him, and she does reveal right at the end that she set up all of these tests and all of these hoops for him to jump through to pretty much get him to the place where we do see him be right at the end. So in some ways, you could say that she really is a master game player. I was pretty disappointed actually by Peter Dinklage's high bottom character. He was very one-dimensional, one-tone, and when he was revealing right at the end that actually he was feeling guilt from unintentionally creating the Hunger Games by suggesting the idea to Snow's father, I feel like there was nothing across this movie to make you feel like he actually does feel like that. And I feel like Sejanus, his character, should have been fleshed out a little bit more, as he was constantly being irrational. I mean, you can understand why, because he was on the district side before, and so he feels an overwhelming amount of guilt, and maybe he's just not as methodical as Snow is. But there was never really anything to explain why Snow wants to be best friends with Sejanus, and I just feel like they could have really done more with that relationship. Maybe if this was a mini-series, they really could have explored that, and a number of other storylines with a number of other characters as well. So honestly, I think The Ballads of Songbirds and Snakes is such a good movie. It's such a shame that I didn't do better in the box office, as it is the lowest earning Hunger Games movie. I just absolutely loved what they did from a character study perspective, even though, you know, this movie was pretty rushed, and they could have made certain aspects a little bit more complicated. And the fact that they leave the ending open-ended, and that they really dive into psychology in such a good way in this movie, just makes it so gripping and super chilling, and one that definitely stays with you long after you finish watching it. And so for all of those reasons, I'm going to give it a mega 7 out of 10. Now I'd love to hear from you. What did you think of the Hunger Games Ballad of the Songbirds and Snakes? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, and I look forward to seeing you in my next video.